And if people knew that, it could revolutionize how they see devotion and even how they live day to day.
So you're saying this sacred isn't far away. It's right here, hidden in plain sight. Like, spirituality isn't about going somewhere far away. It's about seeing the sacred in what's already here.
Have you ever wondered why, despite working hard, chasing goals, and following routines, something still feels missing? Like there's a quiet emptiness no achievement seems to fill. What if the answers we're searching for aren't found in more hustle, but in ancient wisdom that's been quietly whispering truths for thousands of years? In today's conversation, we're not just talking about philosophy, we're uncovering hidden practices from the Bhagavad Gita, Puranas, and sacred texts that reveal how ordinary acts like eating, smelling flowers, or even simply watching a ritual could transform your entire inner life. So before we dive in, find a quiet space, put your phone on silent, breathe deeply, and allow yourself to listen with both your heart and your mind. This isn't just a podcast to play in the background. It's an experience meant to shift the way you see devotion, spirituality, and even the daily routines you thought you knew. Because what you'll hear between Arjun and Maya today isn't just a conversation, it's a reminder.
You know, Maya, sometimes I think we're too used to seeing prayer as something only reserved when life gets difficult. Like when people are desperate, they turn to God for help. But what if prayer isn't about asking at all? What if it's about reshaping how you experience life itself?
That's interesting, Arjun. I'll be honest, I've always seen prayers as a bit ritualistic, like reciting words without really knowing what they mean. What makes them so central in these texts you keep mentioning?
That's the thing. When you look at the Bhagavad Gita, especially the 11th chapter, Arjuna isn't just repeating words. He's praying after seeing the universal form of Krishna, something so overwhelming that his mind and heart had to find words to process it. It wasn't ritual, it was raw experience. Scholars say the Gita is full of prayers like that. And then if you go into texts like the Gautamiya Tantra or the Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll see entire sections dedicated to prayers. These aren't just repetitions, they're outpourings of realization, awe, gratitude, and surrender.
Okay, but let's be practical here. You and I live in the UK, juggling work, bills, and deadlines. Why would someone like me, or honestly most people listening, need to recite these ancient prayers? How is it not just outdated religious poetry?
Great question. And I think that's exactly why people miss the power behind them. Look, in the Skanda Purana, it says that devotees whose tongues are always decorated with prayers to Krishna are respected not just by saints, but even by demigods. Imagine that. Beings who are themselves considered divine, honoring the act of prayer. Now, what does that mean practically? It means the vibration of your words changes your state of mind. When you speak in prayer, you're not just talking to thin air, you're reshaping your own consciousness. That has real-world effects, even for someone balancing a 9-to-5.
But Arjun, let's be blunt. Most people turn to worshiping demigods for something. Money, health, maybe success. You're saying here that pure devotees don't even bother asking demigods for favors. Why? Aren't those legitimate requests?
They're legitimate, but limited. Imagine you're in debt and you keep asking friends for small loans. It helps for a bit, but it never solves the deeper issue. Worshipping demigods for material gains is like that. It scratches a temporary itch. But when someone recites prayers directly to Krishna, they're tapping into the source rather than the branches. And here's the irony. The demigods themselves respect those who pray to Krishna. The text says they're eager to honor such devotees because they know those prayers are pure, not transactional.
So basically you're saying prayer isn't begging, it's aligning.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop at just the spoken word. For instance, in the Nrsimha Purana, it said that anyone who comes before Krishna's deity and starts chanting prayers is instantly relieved from the reactions of sinful activities. Imagine that. You're carrying years of emotional, mental, and karmic baggage, and suddenly there's a way to offload it. And it goes further. That such a person becomes eligible to enter Vaikuntha, the spiritual realm.
Hold on, that sounds almost too easy. Just saying prayers can wash away years of mistakes? Doesn't that cheapen accountability?
I thought that too at first, but think about it.
When you recite prayers sincerely, you're not just mouthing words, you're acknowledging your flaws, surrendering your ego, and redirecting yourself. It's like therapy, but on a soul level. It doesn't erase accountability, it transforms it. Because now, instead of running away from your mistakes, you're facing them through prayer, asking for higher alignment. That's why it works.
Okay. That does sound like it less like a loophole and more like a reorientation. But what about this whole idea of prasada? I've heard it's just food that's blessed, right? People in temples eat it. Why is it such a big deal?
A prasada is massive. The Padma Purana puts it in perspective. It says that simply by honoring prasada regularly, along with charnamrita, the water mixed with tulasi that's offered at the Lord's feet, you achieve the results of performing 10,000 sacrificial rites. Just imagine that. People spend years doing austerities, fasting, fire rituals, but by humbly accepting prasada, you're elevated spiritually in the same way.
Wait, so just eating food offered to Krishna counts as 10,000 sacrifices? That's incredible, but also hard to believe.
Think of it this way. Normally, when we eat, we're just fueling the body. It's often self-centered. I'm hungry, I need this. But prasada flips that. It's food prepared in devotion, offered first to Krishna, and then accepted as sacred. So when you eat it, you're not feeding just the body, you're feeding your soul. And that shift is so powerful that it equals the merit of countless sacrifices.
I like that idea that even eating can become an act of devotion. But tell me about this charnamrita. Isn't it just water? Why does the text give it so much importance?
You'd think it's just water, but it's far more. Charanamrita is collected after bathing the Lord's deity. It's scented with flowers, perfumes, and sometimes mixed with yogurt. The Padma Purana says something radical, that even someone who's never given charity, never studied the Vedas, never performed sacrifices, basically someone who's done no recognized quote-unquote pious work, still becomes eligible for God's kingdom by drinking charnamrita.
That's unbelievable. Just 3 drops of water can change everything?
It sounds unbelievable, but remember, it's not ordinary water. It's water that has touched the lotus feet of the Lord. Symbolically, it represents purification at the deepest level. In temples, devotees take just 3 drops with humility, and they feel bliss because they're receiving something beyond material nutrition. It's a spiritual transmission.
I have to admit, that feels really poetic. But I also wonder, isn't there a risk people treat these things mechanically? Like just gulping charnamrita without the right heart?
Absolutely. That's the danger of ritual without awareness. But when it's done sincerely, even the smallest act becomes monumental. That's the beauty of it. It lowers the barrier so anyone, regardless of background or achievements, can access grace.
So basically, these practices, reciting prayers, eating prasada, drinking charnamrita, aren't about rituals for their sake, but about shifting intention and connection.
Spot on. They're physical doorways into spiritual states. That's why they're emphasized again and again in the Puranas.
I can see why you're passionate about this. But tell me, if these practices are so transformative, why don't more people know about them? Especially in the West, it feels like hardly anyone's even heard of charnamrita or prasada.
Because we've been conditioned to see spirituality as abstract, meditation, philosophy, or belief systems. But here's the twist. Sometimes the most profound transformation comes not from abstract thought, but from everyday acts, speaking words, eating food, drinking water. These texts reveal the hidden spiritual dimension of ordinary life. And if people knew that, it could revolutionize how they see devotion and even how they live day to day.
So you're saying this sacred isn't far away. It's right here, hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's why we're having this conversation.
Now, here's where you step in. If this conversation opened something inside you, hit that like button right now so the algorithm knows seekers like you exist.
So far, we've gone through prayer, prasada, charnamrita, incense, touching, and even darshana. But I see the text also talks about arati and festivals. I've been to a few temples here in the UK where they do arati, bells ringing, lamps waving, chanting. Honestly, it felt beautiful, but I never really understood why people get so emotional during it. What's the deeper significance?
Arati is one of the most moving experiences in devotional life. The Skanda Purana says that simply seeing the Lord's face during Arati frees a person from sinful reactions accumulated over millions of years, even the gravest ones, like killing a Brahmana. That's a huge claim. But think about it. Arati isn't just about watching a lamp wave before a statue. It's about witnessing the Lord being honored with light, music, fragrance, and devotion. The atmosphere itself becomes charged.
So the power lies in the atmosphere or in the act of seeing?
Both. The act of seeing during Arati is darshana at its peak. You're seeing the Lord, but in a heightened state, surrounded by ritual beauty. Light dispels darkness, bells drown distractions, and the fragrance uplifts. All the senses are drawn into one focused moment of devotion. That's why it leaves such a strong impression.
I did notice that. People seemed completely absorbed, almost teary-eyed. Some even stretched their hands towards the flame.
Exactly. That's another layer. The flame is brought towards the devotees, and they touch it to their head or eyes. It's symbolic. The light that was offered to the Lord now sanctifies you. In that act, you're carrying a piece of the divine radiance into your own being.
That makes so much sense now. But what about festivals? The text mentions things like Janmashtami, Rama's birthday, Julana Yatra, and Dola Yatra. Aren't these just cultural celebrations? Why does the scripture give them such spiritual weight?
Good question. See, festivals aren't just cultural, they're memory anchors. They remind communities of divine pastimes. Take Julana Yatra, for instance. Krishna sits on a swing, and devotees push the swing while singing devotional songs. On the surface, it looks like a fun ritual. But symbolically, it's about placing the Lord in the center of joy, making him the focus of celebration rather than our egos.
That's a different way of seeing it. And Dola Yatra, what's that about?
Dola Yatra, often linked to the spring festival, involves the Lord's image being placed on a swing or cart, decorated with flowers, and carried through the streets. The idea is accessibility, bringing the deity outside the temple so that even those who wouldn't normally visit get a chance for darshana. It's an inclusivity in motion.
Ah, like the Ratha Yatra in Jagannath Puri, where massive carriages are pulled through the streets?
Exactly. That's the most famous example. And the Bhavishya Purana says something radical about such processions. Even a Chandala, considered the lowest class, if they simply see the Lord on the cart, they're counted among Vishnu's associates. Imagine that. One glimpse, and you're elevated.
That's huge. But doesn't it again sound almost too generous? Like someone with no practice, no effort, just shows up and suddenly they're spiritually promoted?
It does sound generous, but think about it. Grace is by nature generous. These festivals are designed to break barriers. Not everyone will enter a temple or study philosophy, but anyone can stand on the street and witness a procession. That simple openness ensures nobody's left out.
I love that. It turns spirituality into a public celebration instead of a private ritual. But tell me, why does the Agni Purana link seeing worship during these festivals with Kriya Yoga? Isn't Kriya Yoga more of a mystic discipline?
Spot on, Maya. Kriya Yoga is indeed a system of practice with breathing, meditation, and austerity. But here's the twist. The Purana says that by simply witnessing devotional worship with joy, you get the same results as Kriya Yoga.
How's that possible? People spend years perfecting Kriya Yoga techniques.
True, but think of it like this. Kriya Yoga aims to purify the body and mind so you can reach devotion. But devotion itself, expressed through joyful worship, can shortcut that process. Watching Arati or festivals with genuine gladness aligns your senses and heart immediately, bypassing the harder technical path. It's like two routes to the same destination, one through effort, one through grace.
That's fascinating. So for someone in modern life who has no time or discipline for heavy yogic practices, simply attending festivals or aratis with sincerity could bring similar transformation?
Exactly. And that's the point. Devotion makes spirituality accessible. Not everyone is a mystic yogi, but anyone can rejoice in a festival. That inclusivity is what makes bhakti so powerful.
You know, Arjun, the more we talk, I more notice a pattern. All these practices, prayer, prasada, incense, darshana, arati, festivals, they're all separate. They all engage the senses, either individually or collectively. Smell, taste, sight, touch, hearing, all reoriented towards devotion.
Spot on. That's the genius of bhakti. It's sensory yoga. Instead of suppressing the senses, it sanctifies them. Each sense becomes a doorway to connection.
That's so different from how spirituality is often presented in the West, as if it's about escaping the senses or transcending them.
Yes, bhakti doesn't reject the senses, it redirects them. And that's why it's so practical, even for people like us living busy working lives. You don't need to renounce everything, you just need to transform how you engage with what's already in front of you.
That makes it feel possible. Like spirituality isn't about going somewhere far away, it's about seeing the sacred in what's already here.
Exactly. And that's the biggest takeaway. These ancient texts aren't relics. They're blueprints for transforming daily life into a spiritual journey.
Make sure you subscribe and ring the bell icon because we're just getting started.
Arjun, earlier you mentioned prasada and charanamrita being like everyday acts with hidden spiritual depth. But now I see the text also talks about smelling incense or flowers offered to the deity. Honestly, that sounds even more symbolic. How can simply smelling something be considered so transformational?
This is where the beauty of subtlety comes in. The Hari Bhakti Sudodaya compares it to snake bite treatment. In certain jungles, if someone is bitten by a snake, there are specific herbs that can revive them just by smell. Think about that. One whiff of the right herb and life-threatening poison is neutralized. The text uses this analogy. Smelling incense or flowers offered to Krishna has a similar effect, but on the poison of material contamination.
So it's not about the physical fragrance itself, but what the fragrance represents.
Exactly. When incense is offered, it's an act of devotion. The fragrance carries that offering. So when you smell it, you're not just enjoying a pleasant scent, you're partaking in devotion that purifies you. It's like the atmosphere itself carries spiritual potency.
That makes me wonder, what about people who just walk into a temple casually? Do they benefit even if they're not consciously thinking about devotion?
Yes, that's the beauty of it. The Tantra Shastra says that even if someone smells a garland offered to the Lord, their sinful bondage gets cleared instantly. And here's the kicker. Even someone who wasn't a devotee, who maybe leaned towards impersonalist philosophy, can be transformed just by that experience.
Wait, are you saying someone can shift from being a non-believer or skeptic to a devotee simply by smelling flowers? That feels like a huge leap.
It does sound like a leap, but the scriptures give an actual historical example. The 4 Kumaras. They were great sages, but impersonalists. They didn't see God as a personal being, more like an energy. But when they once smelled flowers offered to Krishna, something awakened in them. They had a change of heart. They became devotees. So that shows how powerful these experiences can be.
That's fascinating. But part of me thinks it's too easy. Surely becoming a devotee requires more than sniffing flowers.
Of course, it's not that simple in the long term. Smelling incense or flowers is like a spark. It awakens something dormant. What you do after that matters. But it proves how sensory experiences can bypass the intellectual mind and touch the heart directly. Sometimes transformation doesn't begin with philosophy. It begins with something as subtle as a scent.
That makes sense. It's almost like music. You hear a tune and it shifts your mood without you analyzing it.
Exactly. And notice how universal that is. Everyone, regardless of culture, responds to fragrance or music. These devotional acts use those universal human experiences to open spiritual doors.
But then the text says anyone visiting the temple should bring an offering, fruit, flowers, even a morsel of rice. Isn't that a bit exclusionary? What if someone literally can't afford anything?
Good point. But look closely. It doesn't say the offering must be expensive. It could be as humble as a grain of rice, a flower picked from the roadside, or even water. The principle is not about wealth. It's about intent. When you bring something, however small, you're expressing humility and gratitude. You're saying, I don't come empty-handed before the divine. It's more psychological than material.
That actually feels very human. Like when you visit someone's home, you'd never show up empty-handed. Even a small token is respectful.
Exactly. It's the same principle extended to divine hospitality. And here's the amazing part. The act of offering also ensures you encounter the incense and flowers, so you automatically receive their purifying effect.
I like how interconnected it all is. But now, this section about touching the deity, it sounds intense. The Vishnu Dharmottar says only an initiated devotee can touch it. Why such strict boundaries? Isn't God meant for everyone?
That's where things get complicated. Historically, temple worship had layers of access. Only those initiated as Vaishnavas, who followed certain disciplines, could touch the deity. Others weren't allowed, not because God is exclusive, but because purity matters in rituals. Imagine a surgeon. Anyone can admire them, but only someone trained and sterile can enter the operating theater. Similarly, only the spiritually sterilized, so to speak, were allowed to handle the sacred.
But this restriction is exactly what caused agitation during Gandhi's movement, right? The so-called low-born classes weren't allowed in temples. That must have created massive social tension.
Yes, Gandhi challenged this by calling them Harijanas, children of God, and fought for their entry. But here's where it gets subtle. The scriptures never banned anyone permanently. They simply required cleansing. Purity was the condition, not birth. But over time, society twisted it into caste prejudice. Gandhi tried to correct that, though his method, just rebranding people without guiding them through the purification process, was controversial.
So temple owners resisted because they felt Gandhi was bypassing the actual spiritual discipline.
Exactly. For them, simply stamping someone Harijana didn't equal spiritual readiness. But Gandhi's push highlighted the hypocrisy too, because many so-called higher castes weren't spiritually pure either. The texts are clear. Birth doesn't matter. Purification does. Anyone can reach the highest devotion if they adopt the cleansing process.
That's powerful. It actually feels more inclusive than people realize. It's not about privilege, but discipline.
Yes, and once someone is purified and allowed to touch the deity, the results are profound. The scriptures say such a person is instantly freed from material sins and all desires are fulfilled. That shows touching isn't just physical contact, it's symbolic union.
That reminds me of how people queue for hours in temples just to touch or glimpse the deity. There's clearly an emotional hunger for that intimacy.
Absolutely. It's like shaking hands with someone you admire deeply. It's more than skin contact, it's connection. In devotion, touching the deity becomes a point of direct communion.
Okay, so we've covered smell, offering, and touch. But what about sight? The Varaha Purana praises simply seeing the deity, especially in Vrindavan. How can sight alone be enough to transform someone?
Sight is one of the most powerful senses. In India, there's even a word for it, darshana, which means to see and be seen by the divine. The Purana says that anyone who sees the deity of Govinda in Vrindavan is freed from Yamaraja's courthouse, the place of karmic judgment, and elevated to higher planets.
So, just by seeing, even if they stumble in out of curiosity?
Yes, even curiosity is enough to spark grace. Imagine someone wandering into Vrindavan out of interest, with no devotion, and just seeing Govinda's deity, they're still uplifted. That's the generosity of divine vision.
That almost feels unfair. People spend lifetimes meditating and someone just walks in and gets a pass.
Yes, but think of it like sunlight. If you step into the sun, you get warmth whether you planned it or not. Darshana works the same way. The deity radiates grace. Anyone who comes in range receives it. The question is whether you choose to return and stay in that light.
That's actually beautiful. It makes the divine feel more accessible.
And that's exactly the point. Spiritual life isn't meant to be a gated club. It's meant to be a home where anyone, from a devotee to a skeptic, can walk in and experience a glimpse of transcendence.
You know, Arjun, I started this conversation a bit skeptical, thinking these rituals were just symbolic at best. But the way you explain it, they're more like psychological doorways. Each sense, smell, taste, touch, sight, becomes a channel for connection.
Precisely. The body itself becomes a temple. And when you engage your senses in devotion, you're rewiring them from distractions to connections. That's the transformation these texts reveal.
A reminder that the divine isn't distant, hidden in scriptures, or locked away in rituals. It's right here, in the way you pray, the way you eat, the way you see, touch, smell, and celebrate. We promised you at the start that by the end, you'd discover a new perspective, a clarity you could feel in your own life. And now you know, transformation doesn't require running from the world. It begins in the smallest acts, reimagined through devotion. Now, before you rush back to your day, pause. Who came to mind while you were listening? A friend? A colleague? Maybe a family member? Someone who, like you, carries the quiet weight of routine and questions. Share this with them, not as content, but as a gift, an act of service. You might be the reason they find comfort in these truths. And then come down to the comments. Don't think of it as a text box. Think of it as a shared archive, a living space where experiences are woven together. Your reflections could be the one that makes someone else feel less alone, less uncertain. That's the power of community.
Explore more reflections on love, surrender, and the divine. Watch the next video or subscribe for deeper journeys.
Love is not the end. It's the way.